similarity between Rock and Roll High School and The Wraith is just that both films have such a strong cast, and to see, Charlie Sheen and Nick Cassavetes, Sherilyn Fenn, Randy Quaid, I mean, just so many great actors all in one film. What was that experience like for you working on The Wraith?
I had a wonderful time. We shot in Tucson, Arizona in the fall, and the weather was great. And when they went out and did all that driving stuff, they could really go and get really good vistas. And whenever I see a piece of that movie, and especially the driving stuff, I mean, it's great. I mean, I admire quite a bit of that movie. Some of that movie sort of doesn't ring true to me, but generally speaking, I thought it was great. But working on it, the camaraderie that we developed. David Sherrill and Jamie Bozian and I and Nick, and Charlie. Charlie is a wonderful fellow. I got to know him, and I actually did a couple of short films that he directed soon after The Wraith. And so, we spent some time hanging out together when I was in my, mid-20s and he was in his early 20s. And that all came from The Wraith. The Wraith is one of those movies. Apollo 13 and The Wraith are the two films that I have maintained relationships with the people I've worked with. Yeah, David Sherrill and Jamie Bozian, I called them New Year's Eve. I mean, it's one of those things. They're just old friends that have stuck. And I thought they were both great as Skank and Gutter Boy. And I always wanted to work with Randy. Randy was an idol of mine. In fact, here's an anecdotal piece of trivia. We auditioned for the same role in The Last Picture Show that he ended up getting the part. He was a little older and a little bigger than me, but I was right in the thick of it. I actually went back to the semifinals or the finals of the audition, and Randy ended up getting the part. But it didn't really bother me. He did such a great job in that movie. I mean, he didn't say anything. He was just sweeping, but he just had a great look, and he was great in The Last Detail. Very organic in everything he's done. He was one of those guys. There were actually three actually, that in my life that I would like to work with professionally, and Randy Quaid was one of them. This is before he jumped the reservation, of course. And David Bowie, who I haven't had the chance to work with, was the other. And I'm brain locking right now, but Jack Nicholson. My dad has gotten to work with Jack a few times, but I don't believe I'll ever have the chance. I got to work with De Niro.
Well, what did you work on with De Niro? I'm trying to remember.
We worked on Backdraft.
That's right.
Yeah, and it was quite an experience. He's better than you think he is. I mean, it's like as good as... the experience as a young actor was really, really great because, his process ends up putting him in a position where he is just creating gold. And, when he's like, the one thing I was told by Ron, well, first of all, everybody was a little nervous because, Bob was, getting Bob De Niro to be in Backdraft was a big deal. And so getting Donald Sutherland to be in Backdraft was a big deal. But okay, Bob, and I didn't audition for Backdraft. Ron just gave me the role. And his partner, Brian Grazer, after Ron had given me the part of playing the autopsy technician with that scene, Brian was kind of nervous, and he said, maybe we should audition some people. And Ron said, no, I think Clint will be okay. And then once Brian saw the dailies, he went to Ron and he said, Clint never has to audition again. So I guess I held my own. But I was warned that Bob likes to do a lot of takes, and he does. And at first, it's not that he's not prepared, it's just that he's warming up. And yet, by the seventh or eighth take, what's coming out of the scene is just absolute, we are, I don't want to get too weird about it, but it's almost like, we were mining nuggets. We were finding little surprises inside the scene. And I was, aware of what he was doing, and I was following along, and he appreciated that, and, we ended up having a great scene together. And it was, a wonderful memory for me.
Well, I figure the better the actor that you're in a scene with, the better you're going to be because you get to feed off of their energy, and they feed off of you.
Well, yes, of course. It's a lot like golfing. If you play with a good foursome and they're really serious about it, you're going to probably play better than if you play with your, fat Uncle Charlie, who hits like an 80-year-old woman in leg chains. But getting back to The Wraith, it was, it was a limited budget, but it was not a low-budget movie. It was just limited. So, we knew we were moving fast, and the accommodations were all pretty dubious, it wasn't, they didn't treat us like stars. In fact, I think they were a little paranoid that we were going to somehow not be professional because of our age. And we were a herd. We were a herd of young 20-something, guys with, per diem in their pocket living in Tucson. Griffin O'Neill was in it. Chris Nash was in it. Sherilyn Fenn, of course, huge role. And at the time, she was dating Johnny Depp. And Johnny came to Tucson and, hung out for a few weekends while we were there, which was kind of a trip. The first time I met Johnny was there.
Is that how the RPG movies kind of got made?
Yes. Well, after Charlie came back from Platoon, because Johnny had worked on Platoon he had done small little tiny role in Platoon, and Charlie was over there, and Charlie finally made enough money to where spending $20,000 or $30,000 making a short film didn't scare him. And in fact, he had signed a deal with some studio to, a 3-movie deal. Now the money's a joke, but at the time it, was pointing him in the right direction. So he self-invested money, and he had met and become friends with Johnny, and so Johnny and I starred in RPG. And, there were 2 RPGs made, and the first time it was starring Clint Howard and Johnny Depp. And then before we could do the second one, Johnny had become a star of that TV show, the one they shot up in Canada. 21 Jump Street. And in fact, Charlie had to privately fly Johnny down from Vancouver. And Johnny only worked on RPG 2 a couple of days because he had to fly up and work on Jump Street. But our credits got switched. He lapped me. Johnny Depp lapped me. It went from being starring Clint Howard and Johnny Depp to starring Johnny Depp and Clint Howard. Oh, well, not a bad guy to get lapped by.
No. And from what I hear, he's still working, so.
Yes, I think he does a movie or two from time to time. He's got some property, travels around. And I think probably the first question I would ask Johnny is, hey, Johnny, do you know how many shitters you own?
Do you have that number handy for you?
Oh, yeah, I could tell you. Listen, I only own one home. It's a 3-bedroom, it's a 4-bedroom, 3-bath house. I've got 3 commodes. But I know, when people start to buy places and start to buy big places, I don't believe my brother ever knew exactly how many commodes he had in his property.
When it comes to the Wraith, I hear that there was some tension between the producers and what was going on with everybody else. Is that true?
Well, yeah. This fellow John Kimmeny, his underwear was too tight. And I don't know, somebody had drawn up some press clippings about John Kimmeny that he read. And, he seemed like a nice enough fellow. And, hey, somebody's got to hold the brain. Somebody's got to be kind of the authority figure. And he was almost kind of like the stern principal of the school. And, he had some lame rules. And, but you know what? He got the movie made. I don't think I sent him a Christmas card the following year, but he got the movie made. He did what he thought he had to do. But yeah, there was some tension. But listen, he was dealing with a cast of young, toxic Peter Pans. We didn't exactly finish work and, run over to the YMCA and work out for an hour and then go to church and then go to bed. That just wasn't really in our, itinerary. But it all got done. Listen, when you do something like manufacture a movie, there's bound to be friction in certain places, and some of it may be founded and some of it may be unfounded. And I don't know what would have happened if the producer would have been a hippie, And Mike Marvin was a young guy, he had written a pretty good script. He was a good writer. Mike, I'll tell you what, I read a couple of scripts that Mike had written, and they were very simple, and he had kind of an attitude about his writing, but you know what? He was a pretty good writer. I like Mike as a person, but he didn't quite have enough authority to sort of override the producer. And so he was kind of stuck in the middle. dealing with a young cast, and he was trying to keep everybody happy. And, listen, there was a limited amount of money. This wasn't Heaven's Gate. We were going to be in Tucson for 4 or 5 weeks. I mean, that was going to be it. I could understand the producers' neuroses about it all and keeping us on a short leash.
No, I imagine with all of those young men in one place, it probably was not very easy.
It seemed easy to me. I mean, listen, I was experienced at the time. I mean, for me, I was a veteran. I'd been working for frigging, over 20 years. But, and I thought all these guys were, they were all pros. There was nobody sucking the oxygen out of the room. Charlie was happy-go-lucky, and he was good, and he was a very giving guy and a part of the team. Everybody was part of the team. The only person who wasn't part of the team was the producer. But if that's how he feels like he needs to position himself, oh well, it ain't my money. I doubt if it was his money either, but, he represented it. It was his job. He was the steward. I think they all wished it was a little better than it was, but you know what? It holds up pretty well. It's an interesting movie, and it's got a lot of fans.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, when it comes to people recognizing you on the street, what do they typically recognize you for?
It's a variety. It's hardly ever Rughead because I'm bald. I get Seinfeld a lot, of course. I get Star Trek, and I get, of course, Ron Howard's brother. Just they know me as Ron Howard's brother, or the Water Boy, Sandler's movies, Little Nicky. And of course, listen. And also, my wonderful fortune about what's happened to me. It's a wide array of things. I mean, I'll get people like on Facebook. They'll see the episode I did of Odd Couple, which will remind them, oh yeah, he was an Odd Couple. Gentle Ben. There are the grandmothers that remember Gentle Ben. I mean, there's people. Anybody. You got to be over 40 to know what Gentle Ben is.
I was so happy to see you show up on that Shatner roast.
Oh yeah, well, listen, the guy who directed, and I'll think of his name in just a second, Rats, and I'm embarrassed because it's not coming right to my head. Very famous sort of television event director. He was the one that called and asked me, and I had worked with him once before on another project, and also, too, he was the one that directed the MTV Movie Awards the year that I got the Lifetime Achievement Award. And he was so impressed with my attitude, and he told me, my wife and I got to go to the Super Bowl one year in New Orleans. I had done some sort of work for the NFL, and they said, hey, you want the opportunity to they didn't send a private jet for me, but I had a couple of tickets waiting for me to go to the Super Bowl, so we decided to go. Oh, Joel Gallen is his name, and his job at that time was to direct the halftime show of the Super Bowl, and we were at one of those Super Bowl parties, and he came up to me and he said, hey, I'm Joel. I go, oh, hi, Joel, how you doing? Yeah, nice to see you again. And he said, listen, I just want to tell you, that segment, that the Lifetime Achievement Award segment, was probably the best piece of television I ever put together. And it made me feel pretty proud. But he was the one that did the roast. And because I normally, listen, if it wouldn't have been somebody like that, I probably would have looked at my appointment book, and no matter what the page looked like, I would have said, oh, I'm busy that day. Also, as it turns out, I believe Ben Stiller may have jogged their imagination, and he's a huge Star Trek fan, and he had done something for that roast, and he had actually brought my name up to the people who were doing the roast, to Joel, and then because a few months later he hired me for Night at the Museum too. I mean, being a Star Trek geek, I have a quick Star Trek story. This is years and years ago, and I was a young man. But, I did Star Trek when I was, 6 years old. And I had an appointment, basically a meeting, an audition. It was a general audition with George Lucas for a project he was doing. And I believe it was Star Wars. They were seeing everybody in town. And I was of age and on the list, and, it certainly wasn't right for the part or anything. But anyway, I got called in. And I walk into this big room, and Francis Coppola is sitting in a big leather chair, and there's another fellow, Fred Roos, who was sitting there, who's a producing partner of them, and then the chair was turned, this big leather chair was turned around, and George Lucas slowly swivels around in this big leather chair, and then you realize it's George Lucas, because he's not a very big guy. I mean, the leather chair completely swallowed him up. So he spun around, and he looks at me, and he goes, "Commander Baylock, Corbinite maneuver." And in my mind, I'm saying to myself, "Geez, George, get a life." So anyway, but yeah, hey, you know what? If I tried to guide my career or tried to, whatever, I would have just mucked it up. I'm sort of a go with the flow guy, and I hopefully realize that when opportunity arises, I don't muck it up.
What are you working on coming up that you're excited about?
I don't really have anything. There is a little independent movie project that I basically co-wrote along with a fellow who is no longer with us, and I have been sort of working on it, doing drafts, assembling, trying to get investors. It's an interesting little project. It would be, a lot of people would call it a pure vanity project. I just think it's a great little story. It's a little horror movie. It's sort of a psychological horror movie, kind of like Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, but more modern and more horror. Anyway, pretty close to making it last fall. On a very limited budget, we hadn't quite figured out exactly how we were going to spend the money and do it for, and get what we wanted. The script had a few demands in terms of production value, and it was, I was determined, I still am determined that we get those production values. And then also, too, this past fall I had my right hip replaced, and this late summer as we were into early pre-production, my right hip began to really kill me. And in consultation with my brother, who, is certainly a part of this in spirit and would love to see me direct a movie, not that I have any sort of burning desire to try to chase him. It's just, it'd be something to do. And he likes the story. But he said to me, he goes, "Listen, if your hip is bothering you and you can't sleep or anything, you're just beginning pre-production. You don't want to do that to yourself. It's torture." So anyway, I parked it, and maybe this spring and this summer I will come back and revisit it, which is going to mean fundraising. And, listen, making a movie is not sexy. I mean, and another thing about making a movie is if I independently can get some financing and get $1 million raised, my goodness, my main job is to be like that fellow on the Wraith. My main job is to be the guardian and the custodian of that investment money. As the director and the actor, that's all fine and good, and I can flex my muscles that direction. But my foremost responsibility is to my investors, and making sure that, as a filmmaker, I take every nickel and put it on the screen.
Well, hey, this has been wonderful. I don't want to take up more of your time. You've been so generous to me already. I really
thank you. Listen,
that.
I'd like I told you before. I got my mom's side of the family, the Spiegels. They had a gift of gab. And my goodness, I had relatives that could talk me under the table. But talking is not a problem of mine, and I certainly appreciate the opportunity to reflect back on these movies and have a conversation about it, and, no problem.
Well, hey, when I put up on our Facebook that we're going to be talking to you, I had so many people say, "Are you doing Evil Speak?"
Well, maybe some other time.
I was going to say maybe in 2016 if you're up for it.
Yeah, listen, maybe I'll circle back. Maybe if I get this little independent thing off the ground, I might end up, stepping on your back and saying, "Hey, give me some help. Give me some PR."
Mr. Howard, if there's anything I can do to ever help you, you just let me know.